Hello, I'm John Trimbos, and this is program 5 in a 6-part series that I've recorded for Acuity. If you haven't seen programs 1, 2, 3, and 4, not a problem, because 5 and 6 are very much standalone items looking at grammar, spelling and punctuation issues, whereas programs 1, 2, 3, and 4 are more focused on writing and drafting style. But this is all about accuracy. It's all about making sure that everything that you send out into the public domain is as fault-free as possible. And I'm just going to share with you just a little typo that somebody volunteered to me earlier this year. There are many typos that just creep through the net. I mean, spell checker obviously doesn't pick up everything, but this is brilliant. Actually, this is so good. You just couldn't make this up. So this was a rather acrimonious email correspondence between two law firms, and one firm, the fee earner, meant to email this to the other with reference to your previous email. But if you look at the QWERTY keyboard, you will see that the C and the V are next to each other on the QWERTY keyboard. And what they typed by mistake was this: with reference to your precious email, which the receiving solicitors thought was brutal sarcasm, your precious email. And it provoked the most unholy row between the two matter partners until somebody twigged that it was actually a typo, that they hadn't actually meant to write anything offensive at all. But there we go. That's the kind of thing that can happen very easily if you rely too much on the electronic aids, for example. And, you know, I'm not one of these old dinosaurs who says, oh, spell checker's rubbish, don't trust spell checker. Well, yes, you can a lot of the time, but there's no substitute for doing the final sweep using just your own eyes and your own common sense, just to be on the safe side. So grammar accuracy, making sure that everything is absolutely accurate and fault-free. And apart from spelling typos, I normally start brainstorm classes when I'm teaching people in little seminar groups. And I ask them, well, what else should you proofread for? And typical answers that you get are, I mean, apart from spelling typos, obviously, but sentence construction, because everything has to be a proper grammatical sentence, or it's not necessarily going to make any sense. Punctuation, anything of a numerical nature, double check, cross-referencing, sequencing numbers, capital letters for defined terms, names, titles, what do people call themselves, Mr., Ms. They could not be, they could be professor or doctor or something like that. So there is an awful lot to look out for, actually. And it's not surprising that the odd thing does slip through the net, and that's just understandable, but obviously it's better if it doesn't happen to you. So more haste, less speed, you know, take it slowly, but as whenever you unleash anything into the public domain, just make sure that it's been thoroughly checked through. Now, this is quite an interactive course. Obviously, you can keep a tally of your own scores, but we'll go through various topics during this program and in the next one. And at the end of each section, there'll be a little quiz where you can test yourself. But we're going to start off with a little introductory quiz now, just to introduce some of the items that we're going to look at. So it's a multiple choice, and what I've said is choose the best answer for each of the following. Now, for some of these, I do mean actually choose the right answer rather than the wrong answer. But of course, all languages have little fuzzy edges. So for some of these, I would accept 2 possible answers, but in others I won't. So question number 1 is, the marketing director returns to her office. She had forgotten the agenda for the meeting, so there's a comma after office. So we have 3 options. A, add a conjunction, so a linking word, a conjunction like because or since. Option B is to replace the comma with a semicolon, if you're feeling that way inclined. Or option C is to leave it alone. So just make a note, what would you do, A, B, or C? And then the answer is, well, not C, basically. Commas on their own, very weak in English, very little innate strength. So if you have two verbs, two actions in the sentence, a comma can't really join them together properly. You can use a comma, but then you have to strengthen it by adding in a conjunction like because or since or as. The semicolon works on its own because it is much stronger than a comma. And because it has more innate strength, then it can join two actions together. And in my experience, people either love semicolons or they absolutely hate them and avoid them like the plague. But I think they have their uses, and we will make friends with the semicolon in due course. Question 2. Each of the programmers has or have 10 or more years of service. Have a little think about it. The answer to this one is totally illogical, actually. The answer is A, has. A lot of people put have, and I can understand why, because we are talking about the programmers, plural. And if we just said the programmers, then it would be have 10 or more years of service. But there are certain trigger words in the English language that always take the singular verb. And they are words like each, everyone, everybody, somebody, someone. It will come across the list very shortly. But those trigger words always take the singular verb. It's like you would say everybody was present for the presentation, wouldn't you? You wouldn't say everybody were present. It's everybody was present for the presentation. Question 3. Mr. McCann, a capable and qualified supervisor, is the candidate. Something most of the employees support. This is one that always flummoxes a lot of people. So is it who or whom? And the answer is whom with an M. Now I'm going to write this one onto the whiteboard because there is a neat trick with who and whom. Let's just clear this. I'll write out the grammar rule first, which is that who goes with the subject, the actor in the sentence, the person who does, and whom goes with the object, so the person who receives the action in the sentence. So for example, if we're recruiting somebody new for the office, so if I write the assistant who starts next week has fantastic references, then it is the assistant who starts because he or she is starting their doing. A different sentence though would take whom. So if instead I write the assistant whom I interviewed can start next week, then it is the assistant whom I interviewed because the actor there is me. I'm the interviewer. I give the interview to this person. They receive the action from me and they take whom. Now the neat trick with this one is to focus on the letter M. Now the feminine doesn't help us, but the masculine does. Him. There you go. There's your M. Or them, plural, them. But just to get the right answer, look at the sentence. Imagine for the sake of argument that the person is masculine. And just ask yourself, would you say he or would you say him? So the first sentence there, you would say he starts next week. But the second one, you would say, I interviewed him for the job. Not I interviewed he, but I interviewed him for the job. And if you would say him, then you say whom. It's neat that, isn't it? So looking at the back end of sentence number 3, he is the candidate whom most of the employees support, because you would say they support him. They are supporting him in his candidature. A couple more examples coming up. So we're going to look at that again, but it does work that trick, I promise you. Number 4, the secretary prepared the report and it was distributed to the officers. A, B, C, or D? See what you think. The answer is most people go for D, and that's fine. And I would also accept B. Generally, think of the comma as the written equivalent of a pause for breath. And commas in English are very discretionary. So just think, where would you naturally pause as you are saying it? And then you can put in a comma if you think it helps the reader. Really not necessary in a short, clear little sentence like this. If it said, the secretary prepared the immensely long and complex report, and it was distributed to the officers who are based at various locations around the country. Once a sentence stretches out like that, then I would seriously think about splicing in a comma. Now, there is a question that I'm often asked in classes when I run this, and I'm just going to scroll forward through the booklet into the punctuation bit. Because a lot of people say to me, I was told not to put a comma before and. Well, you can. If you look at number 3 on the page there, this is the comma that we don't put before and. It's called the Oxford comma or the Victorian comma. We bought books, comma, pens, comma, pencils, and printer cartridges. Now, in Victorian England, they would have put a comma after pencils like that. That's a Victorian comma or an Oxford comma. But modern style is not to. So that's the comma that we don't put before and. But if it's just like a sentence with a little pause in the middle of it, like that one, that's absolutely fine. That is absolutely fine. There's no list there. It's just a pause in the middle of the sentence. And in fact, somewhere on the shelf here, I have George Orwell's 1984. So a classic of English literature, which starts, "It was a bright, cold April afternoon, comma, and all the clocks were chiming 13. So comma, and George Orwell could put a comma before and, so can we. I hope that's dealt with that issue, if it did swim into your mind. If it didn't, bear with me. Question number 5. Why did you not mark this private? A, B, or C? So the context for this, imagine that you wanted a document to be watermarked private on the front cover or private and confidential. Why did you not mark this private when I told you to? Well, in that context, the answer is definitely A. I mean, generally we use quotation marks for reported speech, but if you want something watermarked or something like that, then yeah, you should put it within quotation marks. And in this case, we're asking the question, so the question mark goes outside. Number 6, the disinterested or uninterested employee neglected to report the copy machine as it continually or continuously ran out of paper. Now, there is just one answer to this one, actually. I only accept one answer. And the answer to number 6 is C, uninterested and continually. There are lots more where this came from. We will have 3 pages in program 6 of strange overlapping words. But in this case, the answer is definitely uninterested, because that describes a neglectful person. You know, he neglected to report his duties. So that's uninterested. Bored, lacking in interest. Somebody who is disinterested is unbiased, impartial, without prejudices. That's what disinterested means. So if people talk about disinterested observers at a conference, that means neutral observers. Continually is the right word, because that describes general situations with pauses and intermissions, whereas continuously means literally all the time without ever stopping. So if you're standing by Niagara Falls, then you could legitimately say the rush of the waterfall is continuous because it never stops. But yeah, the copy machine doesn't run out of paper literally every second of the day, so that's why continually is the right word. Number 7. Last Friday, he resigned from the job he has had throughout the autumn and moved to the east. A, B, or C? People tend to have to read this one very carefully, so scrutinize very carefully what has been capitalized and what is not. And the answer is, well, it's not C. Seasons of the year, just ordinary nouns. So spring, summer, autumn, winter, they are lowercase, so that rules out C straight away. I suppose that is a bit illogical as well, really, isn't it? Because days of the week and months of the year, they do count as names, so they're capitalized, but not the seasons. But that's not C. And then really, I mean, if someone is just moving to the east of the country in a general sort of way, I would say the answer really is A, because it's not a place name. I mean, if East is part of a name like East Anglia, then of course it's always capitalized. So I think really the right answer is A. But through common custom and usage, I would accept B as well. So basically A or B. Just choose and be consistent about it. A few years ago, when there was very bad flooding down in Somerset, I read 2 newspaper articles about flood defences in the southwest, the southwest of the country generally. And I think the Times wrote Southwest, capital S, capital W. Financial Times did lowercase s, lowercase w. So you see they're both acceptable. Now I should have done this as a PDF, shouldn't I? So question number 9 was how many words are misspelled? Obviously spell checkers pick those up. Bear in mind what spell checker doesn't though. Let's gloss over that. Number 9, Joanna went to the meeting with Amber and you could hedge your bets and say me, myself and I, but the answer is really me, B. The trick with this one is if you have an extra person in the sentence, like Amber here, just get rid of them. What would you say? Joanna went to the meeting with me. That's the trick, is just get rid of the other person. I is the subject. I went to the meeting, and you would say Joanna and I went to the meeting. But come with me to the meeting now. You wouldn't say come with I to the meeting, come with me. And myself is not really me. Myself you can use in cases of extreme emphasis. So if your boss asks you, has this document been thoroughly proofread? You could say, yes, I did it myself, me and nobody else. But really myself is the reflexive, where you do something to yourself, like I place the headset upon myself, or if you nominate yourself for election or something like that. And the last one, he agreed to, yeah, actually grammar checkers have given this one away, hasn't it? It's the wrong principle. Classic case, of course, where spell checker would not help, but grammar checker seems to have stepped in, much to my surprise, but it should be principal with an LE. And then, look, I'll amend it. Look, this is the right it's, just ITS like that. It's like that. IT apostrophe S only ever means it is. So, like, it's up to you now. Whereas it's is like his, hers, theirs, yours, ours, theirs, ours. Yeah, they don't have apostrophes. None of them have. If you end a letter, yours sincerely or yours faithfully, it's just Y-O-U-R-S, isn't it? So that's why it's the right it's. So wrong principle, wrong it's. Now you can see where we're going to go now. You can see where we're going to go with this. So sentence construction. Basically, everything in business has to be a proper sentence, a proper grammatical sentence, or it's potentially not going to make any sense to the reader. Now, that is not difficult to achieve. A sentence basically requires a subject and a verb. So my dog barks is a proper sentence. The dog is the subject, barks is the verb. Easy. The subject and the object are nouns, and nouns are basically things, and nouns, as you can see, as you can see, nouns come in all shapes and sizes. So they can be people, places, physical items, qualities, but also qualities and concepts. But a noun is basically a thing. And then the pronoun is an easy term of art. The pronoun is just a word you use instead of a noun. So if you look at the repetitive statement, you would never write like this. The manager spoke to the manager staff about the changes the manager intended to make to the manager staff levels. No, that is pure rubbish. We would use pronouns. The manager spoke to her staff about the changes she intended to make, and so on. So he, she, they, them, us, it, and so on. Those are all the pronouns, and we like pronouns because they simplify sentences and make them more readable. Now, 3 grammar rules to follow about nouns and pronouns. Number 1, the noun and the pronoun have to match up in terms of people and numbers. So I matches my, you matches yours. John said he did it. Obviously, we need a masculine pronoun because I'm a bloke. Use who if you're talking or asking about the subject, and then use whom if you're talking or asking about the object. And you remember that little trick I showed you. Would you say he or would you say him? Well, a sentry outside Buckingham Palace would say, halt, who goes there? Because you would say he goes there, not him goes there, but he goes there. But rather old-fashioned way to start a business letter. To whom it may concern. Well, you would say to whom it may concern with an M, because you would say it concerns him or it concerns them. So that trick does work, I promise you. Next one, nouns, pronouns with multiple nouns. These are a bit funny. These are sort of half grammar, half style, really. Number 1, if you have 2 nouns joined by the word and, then the pronoun is usually plural. So 2 people, for example, John and Mary brought their reports to the meeting. You could technically, I suppose, say John and Mary brought his and her reports to the meeting. But it's a bit clunky, isn't it? So now just use one word instead of three. Number two, if you're writing about whole organizations or departments and you are inevitably talking about a mixture of male and female, well, then change the whole thing to plural. So instead of each manager must see or meet with his or her staff, managers must meet with their staff or staffs if they're looking after more than one office. Number three, if you've got a pronoun and it joins up well with or nor, and there's a mixture of singular and plural, then the pronoun goes with the plural, it goes with a bigger number. So neither Anne nor the group heads parked their cars. You don't have to say parked their or her cars. You know, their includes Anne as well as everybody else, you know, if you get the odd person tagged on. And then the last one is more of a business writing convention. So this is all about collective entities like teams, committees, boards of directors. They should always in business documents be treated as singular entities acting together as one. So the committee took its break in the canteen rather than their break, or the board passed its resolutions last night. I know there are lots of people on the board or the committee, but you know, it's the board, the committee you treat as the singular. It applies to partnerships and organizations as well. So you would say Acuity has decided to open up a new office rather than have, even though there are loads of people within the firm. Now, verbs show the action in the sentence, and just as nouns come in all shapes and sizes, well, so do verbs. So you can have verbs of action, to write, to play, to work, and so on. Verbs of possession, the firm has a new computer system, or just verbs of being, so there is or there will be a new photocopier installed here. Yeah, you need a verb somewhere, or it's not a sentence, not a proper grammatical sentence. Now we have some supplemental rules all about the subject and the verb, because the subject and the verb, they provide the main foundation for the sentence. And if there is something amiss between the subject and the verb, then it potentially scuppers the whole accuracy of the sentence. So number one, the subject and the verb have to match up in terms of people and numbers. So plural matches plural, singular matches singular. That's pretty obvious. Now, number two, this is really, really fundamental to accurate English. Ignore anything that separates the subject from the verb. So, for example, the box containing all the missing materials was found in Horwood House. The box, singular, was found. Singular box, singular verb. Anything that comes in the middle, just pretend it's not there. Turn a blind eye to it to match up the singular to the singular, or the plural to the plural. Course administrators, along with the trainers, have to meet at Sunderidge Park. Course administrators, plural, have plural to meet. And in particular, if you see a phrase sandwiched between two commas, that's a subordinate clause, it's a subclause, it's a little extra idea, and you always ignore it to match up the subject and the verb. Next one, when two or more subjects are joined by and, then you always use the plural verb. But if you have two or more singular subjects joined by or nor, then you use the singular verb. So Samantha and David have been recruited to work in our HR department. Well, he and she have been recruited. That's definitely plural. They have been recruited. But either a brochure or a catalogue is to be selected for the induction meeting. Now, you would say both a brochure and a catalogue are to be selected. But if you're just selecting one out of the two, either the brochure or the catalogue is to be taken. Then you're just choosing the one, and it's just a singular because you're just taking one document. Here's the list I promised you. Use the singular verb after each, everyone, everybody, nobody, someone, everyone, another, and much. Every computer terminal is down. Everybody was present for the presentation. You might be talking about dozens of people or hundreds of computers. It doesn't matter. You use these words, you always use the singular. And then use the plural after both, few, many, others, and several. Both books are out of print. Many were asked, but few were able to reply to the email. Can't think of any exceptions to those. So basically, you stick to those lists. You stick to those lists strictly, and you can't go wrong. In the meantime, I'm going to test you though. Well, you can test yourself. 5 sentences. In each case, we have to choose the right verb. Okay, number 1. Simon, accompanied by Andrew and Camilla, is attending the seminar. That's the right word, is. It's a funny sentence construction because it's got a subordinate clause in it. Accompanied by Andrew and Camilla. That's the subclause, and you turn a blind eye to it. The basic sentence is Simon is attending the seminar, and then it's the bit in the middle is spliced in. You could make it plural. You could say Simon, Andrew, and Camilla are all attending the seminar. It's that funny construction with a subclause in the middle of it that gives us is, because it's basically Simon is attending the seminar. Now, number 2, either of these wines, I'm going to give you a clue here, either one of these wines is acceptable for the dinner. Some of these rules, I think we do break in day-to-day speech. So when we're chatting aloud, and I think in a restaurant, we would probably say are acceptable. But it's like this one up here, second bullet point down. Either a brochure or a catalogue is to be selected for the induction meeting. Well, it's either this or that is to be taken to the induction meeting. And then for number 2 here, imagine you've got your 2 bottles of wine standing on the counter. You would say, well, either this one or that one is acceptable because you're just choosing one out of the 2. Okay, we are in strict business writing mode, so we do have to be a bit zero tolerance about this. Number 3, a range of books. So funny one this one, because the subject is a range. There might be lots of books within it, but it is a range. So the answer is a range of books was on sale, or a selection of books was found in the library. A selection of drinks is available for the client reception, anything like that. So yes, it is a range, lots of books within it, but it is a range. Number 4, the committee has decided to extend the project deadline because it's a collective entity like a board or a partnership has. And then the last one is the foundations of the building were uncovered, because buildings in this country always have foundations. Even though it's one building, it still has foundations, plural, rather than a foundation. So ignore anything that separates the subject from the verb. I keep saying that, don't I? Ignore anything that separates the subject from the verb. The foundations were uncovered. Okay, I've said that for the last time. Moving on, though, through our world of grammar terminology, and I promise you, anybody who watches this program will be a grammar terms expert by the time they've got to the end. We now have descriptive words. We have adjectives and we have adverbs. Adjectives describe things, adverbs describe verbs. That's the best way to describe it, really. Adverbs describe verbs and adjectives describe everything else. If you say that, well, adjectives, generally, I mean, in fictional writing and in journalism and so on, adjectives are used to convey color and drama and tension and so on. In business writing, we tend to use them to convey information to the reader. So if you say that somebody is an administrator, that says not very much, but legal administrator says rather more about them. Senior legal administrator, even more information about them. So that's what adjectives do. They basically pump information into the reader. Now, adverbs, they describe verbs. They describe actions. They don't describe things, they describe actions. So how is the verb performed? It could be with what frequency the sun shone intermittently, or the budget is reviewed annually, or quarterly or monthly. Or it could be in what style, in what manner. So she spoke enthusiastically about her trip to the Singapore office, which would be a nice trip. Or she spoke dejectedly about her cancelled trip to the Singapore office when the coronavirus hit. Yeah. So you can see they describe how the action is done. Now, 5 sentences. I've emboldened all of the descriptive words. So I'll just read them through and just think to yourself, well, what are they? Are they adjectives? Do they describe a thing, like a person or an object, or are they adverbs because they describe a verb? Number 1, Maria speaks well when she knows her topic. Well is an adverb because it describes the speaking. She speaks well. Doesn't describe Maria, doesn't describe the person, it describes the speaking. She speaks well. Second one, we have one of each. Danielle spoke nervously about her new role. Well, nervously, she spoke nervously. That's your adverb, because again, it describes the speaking. She spoke nervously. But her role is a thing, isn't it? She has a new role. Well, that's a noun, that's a thing, so that's an adjective. The bright, intelligent trainer received a promotion. Well, they both describe the trainer, the person. So they are adjectives because they describe the person. Number 4, an experienced manager would not have made this kind of mistake. Well, again, that's an adjective because it's describing the manager. And then finally, number 5, it was a very boring presentation. He presented tediously. Well, boring is an adjective because it describes the presentation. You know, imagine a slide deck, PowerPoint presentation. It was a very boring presentation, but he presented or he spoke tediously. Well, that's an adverb because it describes his presenting, his speaking. He spoke or presented tediously. Now, the trick with this one is that if you look at all of the adverbs, they tend to end with ly, annually, enthusiastically, tediously, and so on. The anomaly here is well in number 1. You would say Maria speaks badly when she doesn't know her topic. And then logically, I suppose we ought to say she speaks goodly when she does, but we don't. We say she speaks well because all languages have illogical quirks. The other anomaly in English is fast because you can run quickly and you can be quick but run quickly. You can be slow but run slowly. You can be fast, and then logically we ought to say he ran fastly to catch the bus, but we don't. We say he ran fast. So those are the 2 anomalies, but basically if it's a descriptive word and it ends with ly, it is 99.9% certain to be an adverb. You get the odd adjective that ends with ly, like jolly and things like that, but not very many. Last bit in this section, using appropriate language. These are 2 business writing conventions, if you like. One is about using parallel language, and the other is using neutral language. So parallel in terms of formal and informal. So men and ladies, not wrong, it just looks a bit strange. So men and women, ladies and gentlemen. I was going to say guys and dolls, but I don't think you'd say that in a business document. And then neutral language, well, if something could be male or female, try and find a gender neutral term. So instead of the chairman of the board, chair, chairperson, I've seen both. I tend to say chair myself. The Times actually, when describing chair people, it does say chairman or chairwoman. So people obviously have different feelings about this. I'd just say the chair of the board. The reception was never manned 24 hours of the day anyway. That was a stupid word. It's staffed. Fireman, firefighter, policeman, police officer, you know, modern style is to find a gender neutral term if you can, and I think that does make sense. Sometimes you can't. A few years ago, my brother-in-law and his wife had their first baby down the road at the Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead, where I live, and I popped in to say hello, and this very nice little young man came in and introduced himself as he said, I'm the duty midwife. And I looked at him and I said, you can't be a midwife, you must be a mid-husband, or what about a mid-spouse or something? And he said, no, I'm the midwife. So yeah, midwife, people who bring babies into the world for a living are midwives, regardless of whether they're male or female. So it doesn't always work, but most of the time it does. Meanwhile, back to work, sentence bridges. These are connecting words or sentence bridges. And we have 2 types of sentence bridge. We have prepositions and we have conjunctions, both linking words, but prepositions, think of prepositions as being part and parcel of one idea within the sentence, like Sharon waited for 3 hours. Well, that's the relationship between Sharon and the time she had to hang around. The paper's next to the printer. Well, that's the physical relationship between the 2 nouns. Conjunctions are much heavier, if you like, because they link different ideas or different actions or even different sentences to each other. We must hurry or we shall be late. You see, 2 ideas. We must hurry, going to be late. He ignored the noise of the engines and the shouts of the crowd. Again, 2 separate things, the noise of this, the shouts of that. So they're separate ideas, but the conjunction glues them together. We had potentially a conjunction in our first sentence in our quiz. The marketing director returned to her office because she had forgotten her agenda, you see. Now, Conjunctions are so strong that they can link whole sentences together. So if we look at these two examples on the screen there, we must hurry, we shall be late. Well, they could both stand up as proper sentences, can't they? So they are called independent clauses because they can stand up on their own. The second example is different. He ignored the noise of the engines. Well, splice in a full stop there, and that's a proper sentence. So that's fine. That's an independent clause. The last bit is not, though, the shouts of the crowd. If you just look at that on its own, the shouts of the crowd, what about it? There's no verb there, so that's not a proper sentence. And if you did type the shouts of the crowd into Word or Outlook, then Grammar Checker would pick it up, actually, I'm pretty sure. It's quite good at these. The blue underlining would come up and it would say sentence fragment. And that's what a sentence fragment is. It's something that's trying to be a sentence, but is failing dismally because there's something missing. So if you're editing a document and you find a sentence fragment lying around, well, don't leave it there. Okay, do something. You either turn it into a proper sentence or you glue it onto something else with a conjunction. But don't do too much of that, because the worst sin that people commit in business writing is the so-called follow-on sentence, which is where people glue things together to make mega sentences. And if you've seen programs 1 and 2, you will have heard me banging on about sentence length rather a lot. This is a very mild example. Belinda had to write a letter to the client about the service that he had received, but prior to this, she had to complete a monthly report for the head of development. That is much better expressed as 2 separate sentences, like I've done underneath. And just in case you haven't seen program 1, the guidelines are maximum sentence length around 25 words, but aim for an overall average of no more than 20, and just express one main idea per sentence. And I like that latter guide a lot, actually, because if you look at Belinda, she's got to do an external letter to a client about some sort of service issue. She's got to do a monthly report for somebody. They're not really connected, are they? Apart from Belinda being the author, they're quite separate ideas. So therefore they belong in their separate sentences, and that makes for nice short readable sentences. Now, strongly related to this is the issue of writing in the active voice rather than the passive voice. And again, if you've looked at programs 1 and 2, you will have heard me going on about the active voice and passive voice rather a lot. Just in case you have joined this session first before looking at the others, I will give you a very, very short example. So in the active voice, somebody just does something, pure and simple. The landlord, let's imagine there's a defect in the building, will rectify the defect. And that's 6 words. And then in the passive, the defect will be rectified by the landlord. And if you count that one up, you can see it's longer. That is 8 words rather than 6. So basically, if you write anything in the passive voice rather than the active voice, it'll be a good 20 to 25% too long. And the best way to discipline yourself into writing in the active voice is to ask yourself, where's the actor, where's the subject, the actor in the sentence? And in the active voice, the actor comes first. Look, the landlord will rectify the defect. Whereas in the passive, the actor brings up the rear. The defect will be rectified by the landlord, so think actor comes first. Now, I did get carried away with that passive sentence there, so my example underneath is probably a bit better. The sentence underneath, now it's got 2 clauses, and they are both expressed in the passive voice, and it gives us a 35-word sentence, which is seriously not good. So I'm going to redraft that into the active voice. At the moment, in the event that there's an exercise of the termination clause by the employer, a letter confirming the exercise of this clause must be sent by the employer solicitor to the contractor's head office. Okay, so we also try to use 1 word instead of 3 or 4. If you haven't heard me going on about this, go back to programs 1 and 2. So we'll say if instead of in the event that. No, not there is an exercise of the termination clause by the employer. No, the employer has to come first. So if the employer exercises the termination clause. Oops, excuse me. The termination clause. Then you could say the employer's solicitor, but you could also say his or her or its solicitor, assuming it's a firm or a company. Its solicitor must send written confirmation, send a confirming letter. Many ways you can say that more concisely. Its solicitor must send written confirmation to the contractor's head office. Head office, there we go. Now that looks a lot shorter, doesn't it? Like just over a line. The first one's 35. Let's do a word count. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17, 18, 19 words rather than 35, which is pretty good going, really. And if you imagine there's a whole load of passive voice in a document, well, you know, if you take out the passive expressions and put it into the active voice, you'll be amazed at how much clutter you can get rid of. So that is the active and the passive voice. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on punctuation. I do realize that people's tolerance level for grammar and punctuation is a little bit limited. So we're going to go up to and including the apostrophe, and that will be the end of this program. And then some of the more obscure punctuation marks will be dealt with in program number 6. But starting off with the comma. 6 rules, more like guidelines, really, because commas are largely discretionary in English. I mean, sometimes you do have to use them, but mostly you don't, but you can do. So number 1, where you've got 2 related ideas, and it's the pause for breath. We believe you have good ideas, and the conference committee should incorporate several of them. So just think, where would you naturally pause for breath as you're saying the sentence aloud? Well, that's where the comma goes. Purely optional. I think that sentence would be fine without the comma myself, but it's up to you. If you think it helps the reader to have a little pause point like that, then absolutely do that. Number 2, now you can stick in a comma after an introductory dependent clause, and I do think this is a good idea, actually. Before we can launch our new courses, we need additional funds. You see, it makes the reader pause, and then it gives more emphasis. We need additional funds. That's basically what you're saying, is give us more money. So again, it's optional, but I think it is recommended in this case. Number 3, now this is where you do have to use commas. So if you have 3 or more items listed in a series like that, then you should use commas. And remember, it is customary not to use the Oxford comma before and, but purely in this kind of sense. Number 4, you can put in a comma between 2 consecutive adjectives instead of the word and. Michelle hated the dark, gloomy Staple Hall. Or alternatively, Michelle hated the dark and gloomy Staple Hall. Well, you know, whichever one you prefer, I don't mind. Number 5, to set off parenthetical information. I just like saying that word, parenthetical. We will deal with parentheses or round brackets in program 6. But just to say for the moment, extra nice to know information. Traditionally, people have tended to use parentheses. Parentheses are reckoned to look really fussy on the page and certainly on the computer screen. So modern style is not to use the parentheses, but to use 2 commas like this. Lionel, our HR manager, will help you complete the induction form. And then finally, if you're addressing someone directly, now it could be reported speech or it could be an email instruction. Let's send this report, Hillary, with the evaluation forms, or Hillary, comma, let's send the report with the evaluation forms, whichever way you want to write that. Now, over the page is the lawyer's favorite, the semicolon. And yeah, I think they have their place. You can generally find a way to avoid semicolons, but I think they have their place. Generally reckoned to be about halfway in strength between a comma and a full stop. So you can use the semicolon where there's 2 related ideas in the sentence, but there is no conjunction. The finance department approved the expenditure. The marketing department disapproved. A comma on its own too weak, like the first sentence in our introductory quiz, too weak. You can use a comma, but then again, you need a conjunction. So the alternative will be the finance department approved the expenditure, comma, but the marketing department disapproved. So but would be our conjunction. They're both fine, but I think professional writers would say that if you just have the semicolon on its own, you don't have the extra word, the but, then it does highlight to the reader a bit more starkly the extreme disagreement here, the approval, the disapproval. Similarly, number two, you've got two related ideas, but in this case, they're joined by a transitional word like however or consequently. So this is where you have idea one, and then idea two is the natural or the logical follow on from that. The manager has agreed to the project. However, we must await budget approval. Again, you see a comma before however, not strong enough, really isn't. You need something stronger there. Now you could split it into two sentences. You could have agreed to the project, full stop, and then a new sentence. But I like it the way it is because they are related. If in doubt about whether you want a semicolon or a comma, just think about how I say it. The manager has agreed to the project. However, we must await budget approval. You see, the first pause is a much stronger pause, isn't it? It's a more conceptual pause, whereas the comma after however, that's just a little pause for breath. And again, that's purely discretionary. And then finally, you can use semicolons to split up phrases that already contain commas. The board members went to different countries. David Bailey, England, Angela Ramsbottom, France, and Marcy Green, Germany. If you only had commas there, that would be really hard to follow. So the semicolon splits the information up much more effectively. And then underneath that, we have the colon, which has just the two dots, which has three uses. Number one, to introduce lists of things. Number two, to separate the title from the subtitle of a book or a business document. And you often find this in pitch documents from law firms, like Lloyds Bank PLC, colon, proposal for legal services or whatever. And then finally, we use the colon to represent two in a ratio. So 10:1 ratio if you're writing in figures rather than words. And then our last little item of the day is the apostrophe. 4 rules to follow. Number one, we use them for abbreviations or contractions, so omitted letters. I can't do the report, I shan't know, or I won't know. I don't think this is the best strategy for you. Abbreviations like this are fine for emails, because email is a fairly relaxed communication tool, but not for anything really that goes into hard copy. So if you think, no, this communication, it shouldn't really be an email, it should be a proper business letter or a report or a memorandum or something. Well, in that case, do not use abbreviations, right? Cannot, shall not, do not, will not. Now, mostly we use them to show ownership. And if there's one owner, then it goes before the S. So the computer's hard disk is broken, R'(S). On the other hand, if there's more than one owner, then it jumps a place and it goes after the S. The twins' hairstyles were different. Well, obviously there are two of them. So then it jumps a place and it goes after the S. And then number 4, now this is modern style. This applies to names that end with the letter S, like Williams or Jones or Adams, or my surname, Trimbos. Modern style is like on screen there, Sean Williams' new computer will arrive in the morning. You can still do it the old-fashioned way, which is like this, Williams is, like that, with the extra S. And apparently well, no, I know this because I've seen it. The Times still use the extra S like that. So some people do. Williams is like that. But modern style is not to use the extra S, just Williams. Apostrophe after the S. A lot of place names, of course, have the extra S, like St James's Park here in London. So if you're meeting somebody in St James's Park, I suppose you would have to use the extra S. But I would just stick to the modern style like that. Right. Last little exercise. Put the apostrophe in the right place. Number 1, the director's administrator made the appointment for him. Okay, so we have one director, so it goes before the S, just there. The candidates' applications have been considered and a shortlist has been prepared. Well, you're inevitably going to get more than one candidate for a job, aren't you? So it's bound to be plural, isn't it? It's candidates' applications. They're bound to be several candidates. Modern style, James Carr, rather than James is, but James Carr was leased from the company. Number 4, these employees' holiday records must be updated immediately. Well, because it says these employees, not this, but these, that means more than one employee. Sorry, got this totally in the wrong place. These employees, there it goes. These employees' holidays records must be updated. If it had said this, then it would have been before the S, but it's these employees' holiday records. And then you have a think. Number 5, the union's pay claims have not been settled. Well, whatever you think, you might be right or you might be wrong, because it depends on how many unions there are. So here, if there's just one union, then we'd go before the S. If you're just dealing with one union and that one union has different pay claims for different departments, then it is union N apostrophe S like that. But on the other hand, if you have 2 or more unions, then, so 2 plus unions, then it would be the unions' pay claims have not been settled, because you'd have 2 or more unions. I mean, London Underground have to deal with 3 separate unions, so then it would be after the S like that. So the last one is actually a trick question. So I got you. Bet I got you. Well, I might not have done. But yeah, it depends on how many unions there are. So in this case, I mean, it is quite important. Very often with punctuation, it's just a question of, oh, let's not be sloppy here. Let's just not look a bit unprofessional. But in this case, you would change the whole structure, the whole meaning of the sentence. You'd say to the reader, there's one union instead of 2, or the other way around. So this is not just me being fussy and irritating, although I'm sure I am. No, this stuff is really, really important. I'm going to finish there on that bombshell, and in sentence 6, we will complete our journey through the world of punctuation. We will look at some more conventions about numbering and things like that. And we will look at overlapping words and their different meanings and so on. So lots more interesting stuff to come in program number 6. So I will say goodbye for the moment and look forward to seeing you again very soon. Take care. Bye.